So today we have Ryan Patterson of band Fotocrime, who has also been in a lot of really good bands, and I've had the pleasure of touring with for many years now. We've been friends for a really long time, an incredible musician, and so Ryan Patterson, you are our guest today, and we're talking. So thank you and welcome to our little YouTube channel podcast.
By the way, it's between 2 amps.
Yes.
He was looking for a life that would give him the feeling of being worthwhile.
Welcome to another episode of Between 2 Amps. So,
I guess like we can start as I think you're kind of for me at least. I know that every time I think of Louisville, I think of your bands and a lot of the bands that I kind of grew up also going to see shows with, like Endpoint, Falling Forward, kind of stuff. Those bands, Slint. So like stuff like that. So it's like I guess if you want to start talking about how how Louisville has been your
well, maybe start with like where did you start with music? Did you start with punk, or was it like something that you heard and you're like, oh man, I gotta play an instrument? Or did you already start playing an instrument and then like transition to that into broadening and getting into punk and everything?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a small town about 45 miles south of Louisville called Elizabethtown, and we moved there when I was 8. And so, it was like very isolated, even though it's like an hour from here. So it was like I had no concept of a scene, which in hindsight was super rad because we built our own world, right? Like when we discovered punk and skateboarding and all that shit, like we just did it ourselves. We did basement shows and all that kind of stuff. And I remember like right before punk, I was into hair metal,
Yeah. That's his right here.
My little brother Evan and I like made guitars out of like 2x4s and cardboard, and we would make videos like lip syncing with like wigs and the whole thing. And there's this, I haven't seen him in forever, but there was this kind of transition where we were doing like whatever video was big at the moment, like LA Guns and Motley Crue. And then it was kind of like Red Hot Chili Peppers and, so it was interesting, like maybe as 11 or 12-year-olds.
A question so for Red Hot Chili Peppers, what instrument were you playing? Cardboard instrument would you be playing for Red Hot Chili Peppers?
I guess guitar. Like I don't think we even had a guitar and bass were different,
Yeah,
totally different kind of. Sorry.
I don't think we had this idea that those were like different things at that time.
Yeah, totally fair.
But like, so these guys that I knew, we bought sheet music to songs because we thought that's how you started playing, even though we didn't read music. So I remember like a guy showing up with like sheet music to like an Aerosmith song and was like, okay, this is the fucking treasure map to music or something. And we never did anything with that stuff. But so then my friend, and I have the bass here, my friend bought a bass, my best friend. I vividly remember like we were at the grocery store parking lot, like we just happened to both be there with our parents. And he's like, come see this. And he opened his dad's trunk and this bass was in there. And so that was like the beginning. So he and I started using just a cassette recorder, and he would play bass and I would kind of talk over it. And that was like our first band, and I would like make demo tapes. We never sold them or anything, but I would just kind of like make the cover art. And it's really reminiscent of like the really early Minutemen demos.
Oh, okay.
Which I had like an epiphany a couple years ago where I listened to Minutemen Politics of Time, and there's all this stuff where Mike Watts is playing bass and kind of talking over it. Yeah. And I'm like, man, this is what we were doing. Like this, we heard this and clearly thought we can do this. So So I wanted to play bass, but he beat me to it. So then we were starting a band, and like this one kid, Josh, played drums, and this other kid, Brandon, played guitar, and I was going to be the singer. And then Josh's brother, his older brother, had a Les Paul copy, like a really shitty Encore brand Les Paul bolt-on neck, just as crappy as could be.
Yeah.
And I bought that from Josh's older brother for $50. And I don't know how, but those like mini Marshalls, the little like.
Like the micro.
Yeah.
Like the belt buckle, or like not the belt buckle, like with the belt clip. Yeah.
I had a Dean Markley one. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
It was like
Dean Markley was my first amp.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a Dean Markley, like beige full stack that was like this tall. And with the headphones out, I plugged that into my stereo in my room, and that was like my first amp.
This guy was a stereo player too. He played his guitar into a stereo.
Yeah. And I only played on the neck pickup because that sounded heavier to me. I was like, this is darker.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that was it, that guitar. And like, I bought like a passive EMG that I put in the neck, and like, like these shitty guitars that you kept thinking you could make it good.
Yeah.
Like, you'd replace every piece, but it just like, no matter what, it sucked.
You went right into it pretty hardcore with the fucking EMG.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how I knew what an EMG was, or I don't even remember thinking that was cool. It probably just was what was for sale at the store.
Yeah.
So that guitar, I don't even know what happened to it. I don't know if it was sold or traded, but that was like my first guitar. Then for Christmas, like maybe the next year or two later, my parents bought me a Fender Duo Sonic. It was like a early 60s, like kind of like a Mustang or something, like
right.
Really small. Like I was already probably over 6 feet at like age 15, and this guitar was tiny on me. I don't know if I ever did anything with it. I definitely sold it. There were tons of money now. It's like one of the few things that I'm like, like
really?
we have stories for
I
things.
feel like Walter Schriefels has been playing, like, I think it's a Duo Sonic, but it's just got the neck pickup.
Okay.
And like I was seeing him doing like when actually we went and saw him at the Terragram a couple years back.
I think he was playing Duo Sonic.
Playing one. Like it was cool. Like it was definitely not what I would have expected for like a hardcore band.
Right.
So it's really cool to see stuff like that.
Yeah. So that was like my first real guitar. And then, of course, from there, it's like just like a million different things. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
So did you, like at Louisville in the time, like, would you go into Louisville to see shows, or was it still kind of just like in your town?
A little later, like we already had a band. I don't know if we had played a show. The first show I ever played was at like an outdoor community festival called the Heartland Festival. Okay. And like my band played, and then like a cover band of dudes in their 30s played after us. And I think actually I know, because the first show I ever went to was Jawbox in Louisville.
Oh,
and I remember that like the bass player of my first band had the Jawbox shirt on that he bought at that show, at our first show.
Do you remember what year that was?
I think the Jawbox show was 92.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there was a place in Louisville called The Machine that was like it currently is a laser tag place. It was like laser tag, arcade, and then it was a venue for like 2 or 3 years.
I think I remember the shows there, actually.
I think so. I mean, it was like 90, probably like 91 to 93 or 4.
Okay. Yeah.
I saw a Veil there. That was like my second show.
Okay.
So yeah, my parents would just go drop me off, and then once my friends could drive, we would just come up all the time. But, I didn't know that there was a scene in Louisville. I would come up and go to the record stores and buy stuff. And I would say it was probably like my 3rd or 4th trip up to the record stores. I bought the Endpoints Idiot 7-inch, was like their covers they covered like Misfits and Rites of Spring and stuff. And I was obsessed with DC shit. So I just and the cover they were dressed up like on a
Like Sam Hain, or isn't that the one?
GM, yeah. So like that kind of like led me in. I was like, oh, what's this? And then I saw the DC stuff, and that was my first Louisville record. That was when I realized there was like a local scene, because I guess until then I just thought it all existed in like DC, New York, LA. Like I wouldn't have even had a concept that it existed in Chicago. Like I didn't know Naked Ray Gun or anything like that back then. So yeah, so that was it, and but mainly we did our own shit. Like we brought Louisville bands down. I did shows in my parents' basement. Rented
that's awesome.
Yeah. So that was kind of it, and that was kind of how I got connected to like all the Endpoint and Guilt people and Falling Forward and all that stuff. Yeah.
Wow, that's you're it's interesting because you hear other people's journeys and you're like, oh, you kind of fast tracked it. Like I had a lot of downtime where I was like, I'm gonna play a crate amp. I'm gonna go to this shitty show, But yeah, that sounds pretty. Like I guess like from there, when you started playing in more bands, how did your kind of gear? Like one of the things that Fred and I talk about is like, at least in Chicago, and I think it was the same thing you were in Virginia Beach or Richmond.
Richmond.
Yeah. Whenever a band would come through, you'd see like, you'd be like, oh man, I love this band, and you kind of check out their gear to see what they were playing. And then all of a sudden, if it was like a really popular band in your city, everyone in our town would be like, that's the amp we're coming to. That's the amp.
Yeah.
So we had like, I've mentioned this before, Unbroken came through town and we're like, oh, fuck. And they're all playing like these M80 solid state, like Fender amps.
Say that, yes.
We all got them. So I don't know if Louisville or Elizabethtown had that kind of thing where it's like Endpoint plays this or some band who comes out of from town.
Kind of, yeah, but like it was interesting because I was thinking about this, talking about this, and like I had like little bit of jobs, like part-time jobs, and my family is like definitely like solid middle class at that point, and I had everything I wanted, but they did not buy us gear. Like they were supportive. In hindsight, I'm like, oh, they were supportive even though they were really hard on us about it. They let us practice and let us have shows, and they bought me that guitar, but they weren't like, here's a Marshall, like.
Yeah.
So like we were just playing whatever was at that local shop. Like I remember Park Amps made little solid state practice.
Yes, yeah.
90s, and I had one of those. And yeah, one of the guitar player of my band, one of the guitar players had the M80 head, which was like, we saw one of the guys from Kindle playing. For some reason I have weird memories of like tuners. Like I remember the little Boss tuners with the needles being like people having those Velcroed to their heads.
Oh yes. Yeah. I used to do that all the time. I
remember that.
I think at one point I had like 6 or 7 of those because they like the soldering joint on the input jack would it was just like a dab of solder inside on the PCB board. And it was just like if you knock into the head or someone jumps on the stage, like that was enough to rattle it loose.
Was it that gray unit, right? And had the needle on it?
Yeah.
The gray and orange one?
The TU12.
Okay.
I think is what it was.
So there was that. There was one called like, it was Maestro, I think, like that generic Gibson brand that was like flat, but the needle was kind of up a little bit, so we could put that on the top of our heads and still see. And then I remember vividly Texas Is the Reason coming through, and they all had Arion stage tuners, and that was the first time I'd ever seen that. And it was like between songs, like the 3 stringed instrument players were like, bam, like hit the stage tuner, and we were like, wow. No tuning out loud ever, like no turning the amp on standby. So if I see those stage tuners to this day, So yeah, but like, man, I had the worst gear, and I joined, I was in a billion bands in Elizabethtown and like, different stuff. I mean, I eventually did get like a Marshall guitar amp, but I think like I had a few different 900s and stuff like that early on. And I started to get a concept of that and like amps and how to make things sound a little better, still like really high gain and shit like this. But the first band I toured in was a band called Kindle, which was like on Initial Records. They were a Midwest emo band that was kind of big in Louisville, and then they changed their name to the Kindles and were kind of more like a Rocket from the Crypt thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined that band on bass, and that was like fully my entry into like that world. Like those dudes like were really mean to me. Like
I was just gonna say, did you get hazed? Because
Yeah.
I remember Mark Bricky being quite the character.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still friends with all those guys and like love them.
Mm-hmm.
And like if I saw them, we would laugh forever. And
Yeah.
I was just a shitty kid. I was really insecure and like had no money and just was like a little twerp. And they were like 23 and I was 19, so like they were adults and like and like we would go on tour and we all had to split the van payment, and I think it was $17 a person.
Oh, gee.
And that was like the only money I had for a 2-week tour out west, and I had to give it to him like day one. So I was like stealing all my food. I remember we played Stinkweeds in Arizona, and I begged the owner to let me clean the bathroom, and then she bought me pizza. So it just, I'm like, what the fuck?
Wow.
Like, but I wasn't like a crusty, shitty kid. I was like, I was just kind of like, I don't know what. But so the gear I had in that band was so insanely bad. It was, I can't believe they let me in the band. It was 2 Casino, which was like the custom generic brand, Casino speaker columns with like maybe 4 8-inch speakers in each one.
Yeah.
And I took the amp part out of a crate solid state 212 and built a weird little box for it. It didn't even go all the way. It was kind of like almost like kind of C-shaped.
Yeah.
And that was the bass head. And this is the bass. So this bass is like my friend's bass when he was when like our first bass ever. It's like a PV Fury.
Oh, that's awesome.
So like you can see there's like a screw here as like a string tree.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like all this broke off and is like duct taped together.
That's awesome that you still have that.
Yeah, like you probably can't see, but the pickups, the last Kindle show, I tried to burn the pickups. I tried to burn the guitar, but like it didn't really catch, so the pickups are just melted. So yeah, so I still have it. Like it's kind of the only, because it's one of those, the greatest thing, as we all know, is like gear that isn't worth selling. If it's worth no money, you can keep it forever. So this, like, no one wants this. This would be worth $5. I couldn't donate this to anybody. They'd be angry at me. Yeah, so it's here. But I toured with this thing, and I mean, I think I was probably an okay bass player, but like, I just can't believe they let me play shows with them with that trash. Like, it's so insane to think about.
Because at that time, those guys were playing pretty decent gear, right? The rest of them.
They had Marshall half stacks and Les Paul, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had better guitar gear because I was more of a guitar player. Like, I don't remember why, but for whatever reason, the whole time I was in Kindle, one of the guitar players played my Les Paul Studio. So, but even, I don't know, it's just insanity. So, but that's kind of like, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, like, so had you played bass at all before? Like, I
played bass in like one band before, like a band with my brother, a band that kind of, it was called the Holy Angels Academy. I think we played a show within Kindle.
Okay.
And it was like, my brother played bass first, and then he started playing guitar. And this was kind of one of the bands that led to him starting the band National Acrobat, which might have been when we met you, Niraj. I don't know, but like, that was my brother's band, his kind of trajectory. And I was kind of like coming in and out of bands like that he did. And then later on, I played guitar for that band. But yeah, I played bass, and I really love playing bass, and I like have a deep affinity for it and really, really enjoy it. And with Fotocrime, I do most of the recording all myself, and I just really love it. And I had the opportunity in 2019 to fill in on a European tour with a band on bass, and it was super fun. Like I really
like playing bass too.
Yeah,
I really like playing bass. It's like it's a different it's like different, but I'm able to do create like creatively, since I'm not like looking at myself as like kind of the main like sound. But then you're like, wait, the bass player and the drummer are the ones who are keeping everything together, you know. But it's like, you know, when you're not playing in a band that's just following the guitar, you know, it's like there's a lot of really cool things you can do with the bass.
Yeah, it's
Like,
fun. You know, there's fewer strings. You know, it's a little, you know.
Me like stepping into that role, like it's
Oh, you play
definitely
bass,
like
yeah.
it's like because I over the last couple of years have gone out with Prong a couple times and like playing bass, and it's, you know, as a three piece, it's like there's nowhere to hide.
Right.
Like also like, you know, just changing the mindset to like, because my brain is just so trained to like guitar parts.
Yeah.
And, you know, switching over to bass was like, you know, like just in my head, I'd be like humming the guitar part, but it's like, oh no, the guitar stops here. You're still playing. It's just bass and drums, right?
I guess, Ryan, going back a little bit, is you mentioned something about like that you and a couple of guys that you started playing with had the sheet music, and you guys thought that would be your treasure map, you know, to kind of figure out how to do this. For me, I had a really like, I was like, I didn't know how to play a chord or anything like that, because I'd taken some guitar lessons when I was 10, and after that I just like stopped. So when I started a band, I was like, all I knew how to play on the guitar was like the one string, just by ear, to figure out, oh, that Dead Kennedy's guitar or bass line. I didn't even know the difference. But then like a friend of mine who I was in a band with was a band guy. He played in like high school band, and he figured out how to play a power chord, and that was like the treasure map that like opened the, like, you know, the gates, if you will. And so was there any like thing like that, like where you guys did find the treasure map, where you're like, oh, this is how it's done, and how you kind of like started playing?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I learned a few notes. I didn't learn anybody else's songs. To this day, like I don't know.
Me too.
You know, yeah. There's
Yeah.
people who are like, oh, I just know Metallica songs. I don't know any of that shit. And I didn't like when I got into punk, I liked metal beforehand, but I was just done. Like I didn't listen to Metallica anymore. Like I never heard Slayer till I was in my 20s. Like I didn't listen to metal. I was like a punk and hardcore and indie rock kid.
Yep.
And
Same.
so like I didn't learn that stuff. Like I learned a few, like there's a couple Husker Du songs and some Ramones and Minor Threat, you know, Misfits. But like I learned a few open chords, which are probably still the only open chords I really know. And then I learned a power chord. And I remember very vividly sitting with the guitar and a tuner and learning what all the notes were. Like,
oh wow.
And singing on the tuner and being like, okay, that's A, that's B, that's C. And that was good. It was interesting over the years, like sometimes when people, it's been a long time, but we were younger, people that would like come in and join the band really knew tablature because they learned a lot of songs. So they would like write the tab down to our song.
I didn't tab either for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know that shit. Like, you know, every once in a while I'll like start to learn some song I want to learn, and then I immediately get bored. And
Me too. I can't do it. I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just like, what? Like, no, not for me.
Whatever. So, and it's still kind of like that roadmap where like I'm obsessed with like, you know, Eddie Cochran and Roy Orbison and like Ricky Nelson and a lot of that kind of shit. And I always like have this idea that I'm going to find these open chords I don't know, and they're going to open me into that like rockabilly crooner world that that I can't seem to like, that I want to be in. But like, then you realize there's no fucking, there's no like treasure map that you open. And that's really important to know with gear and with playing music, is that like, you just make it. Like it's not, and we all still get into that shit. I still get into that thing where I need a keyboard or a drum machine or a pedal that like is going to open up this world. And I will say every once in a while, there are certain things you need to unlock that. But then after a certain point, it's like, this is jumping way ahead, but like I was thinking that the first keyed synthesizer I bought is an Arturia Mini Brute. And right now they're like $300. And synths are going crazy, and I see everybody going insane, and I'm just kind of like, just buy that thing. Like start there. And that thing will really last you a long time and does a lot. But yeah, so that like I don't think there was like there are a few things like it's really funny too. We're talking about playing on the neck pickup. I'm sure we all know that band Ashes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Like, I loved Ashes.
Yeah.
Brian McTurnan.
Yep.
Yeah, and like, you know, I don't know how it stands up now. I haven't heard it in a while, but like, there's a lot of that kind of like palm mute, you know, that was huge in the '90s. And I just remember sitting there with an Ashes record of all things and kind of learning how to palm mute and that kind of like palm mute pop, you know, kind of thing. Like you kind of do that like palm mute false harmonic.
Oh, yeah.
Fifth and like, and I remember that being like, oh, you play this on the neck pickup and then you can palm mute. Like no one ever showed me how to palm mute. It was really weird.
Yeah,
And then
same thing. Yeah.
It's interesting. And I do get envious sometimes when I see people that can really play, but then I also feel like I know, you know, that I can play and I know that I can execute. The greatest thing of being an artist for your whole life with like visual art and music is being able to execute the idea that you want to execute. And I feel very confident in that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm the best and like, you know, with your voice, that's a little harder to do.
I think that's an amazing point.
Yeah.
Because coming from like hair metal, like watching Headbangers Ball, and like that was my introduction to playing, and like I idolized Eddie Van Halen, and like the first time I saw them, like I never saw them live when I was growing up, but seeing video of them playing live and like just this unbelievable level of proficiency and playing and thinking that that was the benchmark, and even today, like seeing on other YouTube channels and stuff where it's nonstop, either just insane shredding or terrible blues riffs.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you don't have anything in the middle.
But like what I didn't know early on, something I really wish I did, was that, like, to your point, like your voice is the most important thing, your ideas and like your ability to execute those, and there's an intrinsic value in that. And like, not like in my head, I conflated like this unobtainium like level of playing proficiency with the the entry into being in a band or being relevant in creating music or things that people want to hear. And I think it's important, like, to just say, like, get out there and create, and like create your own lane. And it doesn't matter if you're Eddie Van Halen. Like, to be presenting something that's awesome.
I think punk definitely, for me, and going back to your point, Ryan, what you said is I'm not a shredder, right? And every time I talk, like, someone's like, oh, I'm like, and it was really hard for me to call myself a musician for many, many, many years, right? Because everyone always, I felt, now this could be completely different, that everyone looked down on punk rock musicians, right? But that's who I was. I didn't learn any other songs. I remember we were talking about this last night. Our band had a practice last night, and we were talking about Headbangers Ball and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, I was skateboarding. I had a skateboard sleepover at my friend's house. It's like 7th grade, and they were just crazy about Guns N' Roses because Appetite for Destruction had just come out. And I was like the only one that just didn't connect with it, And I saw them playing guitar, and it was all like really flashy and stuff. But I was like playing. I had just started kind of fooling around on the guitar, and it was like Dead Kennedys, and even those guys don't play traditional power chords necessarily. They're like weird, right? But that was like kind of like, I'm like, oh, these guys aren't that. They're a little bit more like just they're doing kind of what they're doing, So I kind of felt like that was a really good opportunity. At least I don't know if that exists now. I hope it does. But growing up in the punk scene, where you're able to be an artist because you're doing with what you got, and then that you're confident in that, right? So it's like, and me knowing you from the from the outside, from this side, it's like, you're an amazing musician, and your art has been so awesome that it's like, no one would ever question. It's like, oh wait, you can't play sweeping arpeggios or whatever.
Well, I appreciate that, but yeah, I mean that kind of stuff, like, I feel like for me, what I'm trying to do would be a hindrance.
Yeah.
And and I also realize that like what I'm interested in on a lot of levels is texture and sound, and like, this is once again jumping way ahead in my trajectory of music, but like learning that I really like the way a note sounds. Like I would like hearing that note. I like single notes a lot. I play single note stuff a lot more than I do chords.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that, the way that works. And I liked investigating signal path and stereo effects live and things like that. And that just resonated to me, maybe because I can't shred, but like that's more of what I want to hear. Like I don't listen to prog rock really, but like if I listen to some Yes songs, when they go off and like all the shredding, I just am like, ugh. And then they come back to the song.
Yeah,
Unless it's like the ripping kind of punky metally kind of parts. But when it gets back to the song, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then it goes off on a trajectory I don't care about. Then it comes back to a song. And at the same time, I don't like a lot of tinkering. I usually really like concise songs, and I guess that's because of punk, but also because of growing up with like old rock and roll and the Beatles and stuff like that. Like, I like concise.
Yeah.
I don't think it was until I had a similar, Avail was my first punk show. It was like 94. And that was the first time I had any like semblance of an idea that like, because going back to Van Halen, like you see that they're at the top of the game, like I couldn't like visualize, and it was like, how do you like get there? Like where's point A? Like I see point Z over there. Like, and then seeing a punk show, and it's just like, they put it together themselves, like, and then later, like, the evolution in Richmond was, Guar started touring, and then it's like, hey, they taught Avail, like, hey, you can get in a van, you can book a tour, and you can go out and do this yourself.
Right.
Like I didn't realize there was a Guar Avail connection.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Richmond's tiny.
Yeah.
So, but like it was like this whole amalgamation of like how to tour, how to be in a band, how to put together a show, how to write songs. Like, because they had songs, like, and they were catchy as fuck. Like, I still love, like, I don't know how much of it's nostalgia versus how much of it's, like, I feel like they're still great songs. And there wasn't shredding. And, like, but there was a ton of kids there. And saying, like, it's amazing to have a couple hundred kids in a room, and just as amazing, if not more, than, having 10,000 people in an arena and pyrotechnics and David Lee Roth flying on a surfboard or whatever.
Did you, I guess, like I think you mentioned before, how like certain things do kind of help you, like kind of write in a different way. It's like I remember, like sometimes I'll like if I have like a spell where I'm just like, God, I'm not really feeling inspired, or I can't really come up with anything. Sometimes if I get a new guitar, like sometimes stuff just starts coming out because the guitar plays different, it reacts differently. I remember I got a Gretsch semi-hollow body, and I started playing on that, and I was like, whoa. And I started playing way more like different chords, kind of different styles, just because of the way that the guitar sounded. Do you have anything, like experiences like that too?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like there's always that thing of like getting a guitar and this guitar has a different sound and it works in a different way. And like I have too many guitars, like we probably all do. And like, but then there are things like I have like a bass six, and there are certain things that have a certain sound. Like I have a 12 string, and it's like, well, nothing sounds like that. And I gotta, I want that sound here and there. And so I find that is true, and I've become very addicted to buying synthesizers. You can't see that I'm like surrounded by synthesizers, but they're really difficult because they all sound different. I mean, it's not like a guitar. They sound different.
Yeah.
Like, my Jaguar sounds different from my Les Paul, but like synthesizers have completely different characteristics. And when you hit that note or you do whatever, it's just kind of like mind blowing and just and things do come out of it. So I find that to be the case always. Like I also kind of, I don't know. It's like I was thinking once again with all this, like I don't think I have any like vintage gear, like guitars, because they're expensive. I don't really want to tour with them. I had like a 70s Les Paul that I played forever that I sold, a decade or so ago. I was like a little tight on money and sold it. And sometimes I regret it. And then I think, what the fuck would I do with it? Like, I saw one for like 4 times the price the other day, and I thought, oh, I should buy that. And then I'm like, it's just gonna, sit on a stand or like hang on the wall. And like,
I think that's we just had this conversation with one of the previous guests who does like buying old guitars, so I think it's just like people who are like, I love buying old vintage stuff. Like I have a friend who just got back in Chicago who's just like buying all these vintage amps. He's not really playing in a band, but he just wants them, and it's just not cheap, and I'm just like, oh, why are you doing that? But to each his own, But for me, I agree. I'm kind of on the same page as you, where it's like, I have a lot of, it's weird because I don't know what's vintage anymore. Like I was like, oh, I got a guitar from '87. Is that a vintage guitar? Right?
It is now.
Right.
But
well, I mean, you have tons of money, that's a different thing, but like,
right,
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I've spent, I haven't spent more than like $1,000 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money for most people, and for some people that's an insurmountable amount of money. And like, I don't have a lot of stuff that I paid more than that for, because like you guys are talking about, like, my JCM 800s, I bought a long time ago, and
I was gonna bring that one up actually.
Oh God, those were like I don't know when it happened. I feel like the last JCM 800 I bought was like $450, $500, something like that, and it was maybe like 10 or 12 years ago, and it seemed like I remember having to look a little bit harder to find that, but I was still able to find it. And then I don't know what day it was, but everybody got together and we're just like, these are $2,500 now.
Right. And that's everything. That's records. That's, I'm sure if you're into comic books, you go to, like, you don't find a cool record used in a store and it's not the Discogs price. And so, that's part of the downfall of all this stuff. But like, kind of what you're getting to is that like, all that shit doesn't matter. Like,
right.
I mean, we all know that like the greatest songs in the world were written on trash, like, and things were, like if you watch like footage of the Beatles recording, like, those fucking mixing desks, the crazy ass, like Abbey Road, with like 3 huge knobs, like the people built those things. They didn't go and like buy it, like it was built for that purpose. And it's like I a couple times recently I've sang on not a mic I own, but a microphone that's like $5,000.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, it sounds really, really good. And then I think it doesn't sound that much different than the $700 microphone.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's not $4,300 more good.
I don't sound like, like I don't sound like Roy Orbison when I sing in either microphone. I still sound like me. And that's the idea. That's the point with all of it, is like, find your sound and find what you want to do. And as we all know from being touring musicians and like doing fly-in shows and European tours and shit like that, like when I found that other ability to roll in and no matter what you were playing, make it sound like you. Because your first shows when you play like a back line of Rental Gear, you're like, oh right, like
Yep.
Like I remember Coliseum was on tour and we did one of those Gay Trotter sessions, and they're like, oh, we have gear in the studio, and we go in and it's like a not a cool PV combo, like a really shitty one. Like everything that was in there was like really shitty. And we did the recording, walked out, and I'm like, sounds like us.
Yeah.
And learning that and like getting those few things that like are essential to you, which can be, I mean, it can be the fucking strings, all those kind of things. They really you build these little things up, and then at that point, if you're playing a $500 amp or a $5,000 amp, it still sounds like you. I think that's like a very, it's a hard thing to learn. It takes time, but I like when you get that, it's very like satisfying.
Yeah, yeah. I have a definite policy, like you're saying. I have never paid more than maybe $800 for gear.
Yeah.
Like, and I won't, just because I don't see that difference. You know, like I know a lot of people are like, oh, and that's fine, but like in the studio, even with the analog and digital, for me, you know, it's like, I mean, I can tell sometimes when I'm, you know, playing, it's like, oh yeah, tracking the tape, 2-inch tape with bass and, you know, sounds great. But is the average listener who's not a musician going to be, wait, this is not a digital amp, this is not a tube amp or whatever, you know, that. So is it worth putting all that money into? I mean, if someone's paying for it, by all means.
Right. Well, and all these things are also, you know, as we all know with music, so much of it is about your experience. It's like, I think about records I've done, and I don't think about, I think about a little like how they sound is this, and the experience of making them is this. And, you know, and especially as somebody who's never really had much success in music, it's like none of the records are selling a lot, or like, you know, it's like I see a little thing every once in a while, like, oh, somebody likes this thing, that's fucking cool, you know. But to me, what's important is the memory of making that and the experience. You know, it's like I think about the experience of doing these things more than I think about the songs. Usually the songs don't age that well for me. You know, like I don't want to listen to my own music from 15 years ago.
You're totally right, because I just did a podcast yesterday for my friend Zed, and we did a kind of like revisited that Twilight Suicide Fall record.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I talked about was the memories, not the actual music or the recording process per se. You know, like what gear did I use? I mean, I sort of remember, sort of don't, but it was the memories. You know, at least that's how I approached with the experience of playing in punk bands and touring and stuff like that. You know?
Yeah, that's what it is. Like you don't go on tour. I mean, obviously people go on tour to make money. You know, we all to different extents, but like, you know, I'm like, that's for good or bad. Like I go on tour for the experience and to play shows because I enjoy playing shows, but like the financial shit is just kind of like this other thing that keeps the wheels on.
Yeah.
And like in July, Fotocrime went and recorded at Inner Ear Studios in DC. Coliseum recorded there like 10 years ago. And then when I heard that they were closing, I emailed Jay Robbins and I was like, hey, we should go back in there because Coliseum had recorded with him there 10 years ago.
Okay.
And it weirdly happened to be 11 years to the day.
Really? Wow. What Coliseum record was recorded in your?
This EP called Parasites. Like
okay.
That. It was like on a day off on tour.
Got it.
So we went in there, you know, and like that place is.
It's like a museum, right?
Yeah, it's a museum, but it's like, it's not a very well designed building, you know, it's like a space and it's a little odd. And like, you know, we did everything direct to tape, like the drum machine. Like I'd never done that with Fotocrime, and I thought it'd be really fun to do this how it would have been done
back in the day,
the 80s, right? Like, so we did all that stuff. Like it was all 100% to tape, and it was super fun, but it was about the experience. Like we did 3 songs. I don't even know when or if those will come out, and I don't even care, you know, because we did all that and we had that super fun experience in that place before it disappeared forever. Yeah. And that's what matters to me. Like putting those songs out into the world, I'm sure I will at some point, but like that's for the people that want to hear that music. Mm-hmm. The making of the music is for me. I don't know. I have a weird thing lately where I like really enjoy music more before I release it, you know, like I'm getting more and more to this point where I'm like, I don't know. I really love this when it's just for me. It's like when I listen to it all the time, I'm really pumped on it. And then when I put it out into the world and give it away, give it to the world, that's when all these other things come in. Like accolades are great. Disappointment sucks. Mm-hmm. Someone else's opinion on your music always sucks. You know, so it's like all that kind of stuff more and more. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Like I kind of envision like in 10 years just being like a guy that just makes all this weird music for himself because that more and more just becomes more of what's important to me about it is like the act of making it and the enjoyment of hearing it and things like that, you know. I don't know.
And you kind of developed into, with Fotocrime, you've developed into kind of your own engineer too, right? Because you're recording all of it yourself.
Yeah, the newest record I recorded all myself, and that was like I've recorded bands off and on. Like I, did a lot of like Tascam 8-track cassette recordings that were super cool. And like when I go back to those, they always sound awesome. But I didn't want to get into that world because it's
Yeah.
like we're talking about the microphones, it's all like a money pit. And I see when we all go to studios, we expect the engineer to fucking work 12 or 14-hour days.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to do that for somebody else.
The more like, and over the years, like I've gotten more into like home recording and demoing, and like, and to your point, like I think what the most fulfillment I get is like through the creative process, just like fleshing ideas out and really doing, making what I have work, because I'm not pumping thousands of dollars into microphones. And it's like, I'm like, damn, there's so much I can do with an SM58. Like,
Yeah.
when push comes to shove, like with an EQ and a microphone, like it's amazing what I can make like a $200 acoustic sound like through
Yeah.
and it's like, and it gets the job done.
Mhm.
And like, so I was curious, like what, like going through like all of your fly gigs and all of the, just to bring it back to gear a little bit, like what's the must-have thing that like, can't go anywhere without?
So like the I didn't pull it off my board because it was I was gonna pull it off but like I have played every single show, every band I've done for probably, I don't know, probably 15 years or something. There's an electroharmonics clone theory that is always on, never turns off, and that and a Boss DD5 delay. It's like the Boss stereo delay that like when you hold it, it does like the hold thing and it kind of ramps up.
Yeah.
That delay pedal is awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's so I buy lots of like I think they stopped making the clone theory, so I bought a few more. Like there's one in Europe, whenever someone plays guitar, like Nick, who Nick Thieneman from Young Widows and everything, he's been playing guitar and Fotocrime most of the time, but like I always like have a, okay, here's your clone theory, it's like
here's,
guitar sound and
here's your Ryan Patterson starter pack.
play. Like in Coliseum, that I found that wide chorus, like the clone theory adds a little bit of mid-range kind of grit, which I'm really, as a guitar player, like I'm all about mid-range, like that's the JC 100 is just like a mid-range sledgehammer. So like it does that, it creates this great, morphing like modulation effect, but like it's really interesting. Like it's a really unique pedal. I feel like it should have more accolades than it does. Like I don't ever hear anybody talk about the clone theory, and I think it is like the absolute best. Like any other chorus pedal people freak out about, I just think pales in comparison to this.
Wow,
And
okay.
so,
I gotta check it out. I've never thought about that pedal as like, especially like knowing your bands and knowing the music that you've written. I was like, oh, really? Wow. Now I'm gonna go back and like listen to it and be like, oh, interesting.
that's the one. Like the signal
Okay.
goes to that, you stereo out from that, stereo into the delay, stereo out, and that's it. Like that's my sound basically. And that came from me being obsessed with Geordie from Killing Joke. And
Yes.
Oh,
so he inspired me to play hollow bodies. I pulled out the guitar I've been playing like so Coliseum. Eventually, I started playing like center block hollow body, and now I play fully hollow. But he uses a Bell Electrolabs automatic double tracker that was made in like the mid 70s,
okay.
and you can't find them anywhere. Like, yeah, I'm always like searching, and it looks like the last one sold in Reverb was who knows when.
Yeah.
I went down a rabbit hole with the amp. It's like this 200-watt like tube amp that some dude in England had made, and I found one on Reverb, but of course it was like wrong voltage, and, like,
Right.
and I was never actually gonna buy it, but I was just like, I love his guitar tone. It's incredible.
Well, he's weird because he uses all sorts of shit. Like when I've only seen them once, and I don't remember what amp he was using, but it was something not very cool. And there's a studio in Prague where they record often, and they posted some video or photo once. The engineer there, like, I think it was like a Brugera. Is that Bugera? Is that what that amp's called?
Oh yeah.
One of those amps do like what looked like two single 12-inch cabs, and you know, I feel like he's just kind of like, oh, this will do. I mean, he has that like 50s Gibson hollow body, and the Bell ADT. When you see them play like old shows or like shows when he's playing with his own gear, I think he has them like bolted to the top of his heads, and I think he uses 3 amps, and so it's just your classic like based on the Beatles tape delay things they would do. It's just a delay with a modulation on it, and the more I looked and was obsessed with that, you can't find those. I mean, and then there's like a Keeley ADT thing that seems okay, that's currently made, but that clone theory, it after a lot of research and a lot of trying things out, it just connected with me. It just really has a very unique personality and like adds a little bit of gain, and it's just a beautiful thing. And so that is always on. It's filthy. Like, yeah, I'm shocked it works. I mean, it's one of those things, you guys probably have this like where you want to like talk to the people, and sometimes we get to, but you want to talk to the like people who made the clone theory, like Electro-Harmonix, but like whoever the dude or woman is that like invented that fucking thing, and be like, I have used this every show. It's caked with rust and shit. It never breaks. It's like Boss pedals. They never fucking break. They rule.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we're getting back to. We're like, I don't know what, to whatever extent I might have a fan, but like they probably wouldn't think that I just bought an off the shelf chorus pedal and one of the totally generic Boss delay pedals.
Yeah.
And that's on every fucking guitar sound I've ever made, And so, yeah, so those are the things for sure. Like those two things, if I have those, I'm good. I mean, I feel like I can make anything work. I've gotten really obsessed with like tape delays. I've got a bunch of tape delays, and I use those a lot. And I find those really like are amazing, especially for digital recording, because you run a guitar through that and you're getting some tape saturation, but you're also getting that hum and that those inconsistencies that you lose.
We're using the tape delay live?
I don't think I ever have, no.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a company in Australia that makes new tape delays, and I got one from them, and I thought about touring with it recently, and then because I'm singing all the time in Fotocrime, like the fun of the tape delay would be to turn around and fuck like it would just be
wait a minute, I got some more, bro. I'll be right back.
Like hitting the synthesizer. I find myself like reaching for the microphone and all these other things. So I don't need one more thing to like occupy myself. But
There's a funny story. We were talking about one, you're talking about experiences, and then two, we were talking about the JCM 800.
Mm-hmm.
The amp thing, as I was telling him, like, I used to have a JCM 800 50 watt, and I fucking got rid of it. And I was like, I bought it from Ryan Patterson, and then I sold it back to Ryan Patterson.
Oh shit.
Yeah. And I was like, fuck. Do you remember that JCM 800 that you had? You sold it to me. I think I played it, and I was like, this thing's good. But then I sold it back to you because I needed money for a 412 that Emperor was making me. And then I was like, I'm not usually playing this. So I gave it. So you bought it back from me. And I was like, ah.
I don't remember that. I do. Maybe it's the same amp. Maybe that's like another step. But I traded my 50 watt 800 for a twin, and a dude in Seattle saw that the guitar store in Louisville had like posted it with like sitting on top of the Coliseum case.
Okay.
He bought it and they shipped it to Seattle. Then he moved back to Chicago, and I bought it back from him. I don't know if it was the same one. Maybe it was.
I think it might have been the same one.
Okay.
That's crazy. I didn't know that part of the story, because I remember buying that from you, and they're like, yeah, $550, man. I'm like, all right, cool, because that's how much they were running back then, right? I was like, yeah. And then I think you were like, hey, you want to sell that back to me? Yeah, actually, because I need money for that.
I didn't remember that, but yeah, that is like, that's one of those things. I had this, like I was saying before, this thing where you feel like if it doesn't get used, what's the point of it sitting in a case somewhere?
Yeah.
I still have a little bit of that, but like, so that was my whole concept with that. Is like, I'm not using this. I had a 100-watt 800 that I was using all the time.
Okay.
And then of course, as soon as it was gone, I was like, what am I doing? You know?
That's like, ah!
And that thing
And
like,
it's $2,500.
Yeah. And there's another thing going back to experiences. I know that when Hope Conspiracy was starting to play a lot of shows, we were playing shows with you guys a lot, National Acrobats. So that's how we kind of got to know you guys. But like talking about like recording experiences, but also like live experiences and like just touring, and how you were saying like your tour story about asking to clean the bathroom and you know that is that's like a total like punk story. But also remember, like, you know, you play these places sometimes, like venues or you know, studios, that you're just like, this is where that was recorded. Or I think this is the first time that I had played CBs and you guys were playing this. It was that show was like Cave In, Converge, Hope Con, National Acrobat, I think, at CBs. And I remember that was the first time, and I was like, this is CBs? Whoa, this place is held up by fucking duct tape. But the show was fucking incredible.
crazy.
Just all of us being there, and like, that's like something you're never going to forget. And yeah, I don't know how we probably sounded really bad because CBs didn't sound great. You know?
No, that was amazing. Yeah, that was our first time, because we also played. I think you guys play? We did play Baltimore the night before.
Yeah, at Autobar, right?
At the underground bar.
Yeah,
I don't
okay. Yeah, play that too.
But yeah, I mean, and that show actually I used to have a Memory Man pedal like zip tied to the front of my road case. So that might be, I was kind of doing like analog delay on the front of that thing back then. I have a video of that show. And
really?
Yeah, but kind of same thing. Yeah, I was like, I knew CB's was shitty, but it was also like so much smaller, and like where you walk between the bar and like the raised area was so tiny, and yeah, super weird. But that show, like, that will stick out in my mind forever, because that was like a sold out show at CBGB's. Like Black Widows played a couple years later there, and like nobody was fucking there, and I was like, okay, you know, like full people, you know, you're like, this is the worst place on earth. But yeah, that was super amazing. I mean, that was like, for us, like, yeah, that was like mind blowing, you know. I mean, that was truly incredible.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming up on the hour.
Oh yes.
So is there any, like, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. Like, I don't know, maybe at some point you'd want to come back for a second time. I feel like we didn't hit everything. Like, we just scratched the surface. But is there anything that you want to talk about, like upcoming albums, tours, anything you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, the new Fotocrime record is called Heart of Crime. It came out in September, and yeah, that one recorded all myself at home, like over the last year. It was super fun. It's, you know, of course, whatever the newest thing is, that's like your thing you're most proud of. But
yeah,
I feel like it's leaps and bounds above anything else I've done. So that'd be the main thing I would encourage people to check out. And yeah, we're doing some touring. We're like touring down south to like Florida and back up early December. And I don't know, I'm working on all sorts of stuff. I have an instrumental record mostly finished. I'm trying to figure out what the music is so insane. Like, you know, every label and record plant is so backed up that, like, I might just like put it out myself or something. But like, that's mostly done. That's really exciting. It's kind of different for me. And yeah, and other than that, I do this clothing line called Cat Magic Punks. And
it's awesome because we're both cat dudes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cats lurking
behind
this
it's like 5 cats.
Yeah, Fotocrime, Cat Magic Punks, Shirt Killer is a site I own, an online store for a bunch of bands. And so yeah, I mean, I'm super fucking fortunate. I get to like work in art and music and play guitar and do fun stuff all the time. Like, you know, it's interesting. Like, this is super, you know, I have, like, as we probably all do as punk rockers, like, I hate motivational quotes, right? Like, you know, like, oh, they make me so mad. Like, you know, but I heard a thing on a podcast the other day where, like, somebody was saying that, you know, we all get stuck focusing on that like 5% that we don't have. and not that 95% that is great about our lives. And like, I've been really trying to focus on that. And I would say like, yeah, that's like, I've been extremely thankful lately just to think of like how fucking amazing my life is, and like, and understanding that like all of it is so deeply connected. Like I wouldn't be talking to you if we hadn't been weird Midwest kids making music, you know, and like all that kind of stuff, like all that trajectory, and the fact that it can sustain us through all the things we do, and that like I get to make, you know, make art and make a living doing it is like just totally insane. So yeah, that's, I don't know what my, you know, I don't have a wrap up point.
No, it's good because that's kind of like what, you know, as like we kind of grow older, you know, our generation, I guess, is, you know, now there's like so many younger people who, you know, we hopefully can have on the show as well, that we can, you know, get their perspective, because I want to learn what, you know, how they're learning and how they're, you know, creating now as well. But for us, it's like, oh, you know, there's definitely people that we've seen that have really made music their, like, you know, like their livelihood, and in a way that's like at a level that I would never imagine, you know, like very pop oriented, like huge, you know. And you know, sometimes there is that, well, I could have, you know, XYZ or whatever, and then you're just like, hey man, you're able to put out records and you still tour, you know, you can still like do flash, you know, tour, whatever, and be creative. And yeah, that's like, you kind of have to take a step back and look at what you have, you know, and not trying to be like all like, you know, motivational. I totally understand what you're saying, you know,
just like
but self-help kind of stuff. But yeah, it's like you take a step back and you're like, yo, this is all been possible because of this community that I started creating in, you know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just like that connection to punk and hardcore, it's like, you know, I ran into somebody last week that like I hadn't seen for a long time. He was on tour with a good friend of mine, and it was just I was like, oh, it's that guy. I don't really know him. We just sat down and we're like talking about hardcore records we loved and like new shit, you know, and I just am like, I just love that shit. Like I just never, you know, I never take it for granted that like I really appreciate the community and like what it gave me, like all this weird trajectory of like being a shitty kid and shitty bands. Like I took it to heart, and like I still very much live it, and I'm like super stoked on it and stoked to like talk to you guys and just do all this shit. It's fucking rad. So
yeah. Ryan, we appreciate it. Thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it, because we know it's like a little later over in
yeah, it's bedtime over here.
Yeah.